Hello everyone on YouTube. So today we're gonna talk about Rook Endgame Essential Part 1. The third world chess champion Jose Raul Capablanca once famously said, "In order to improve your game, you must study the endgame before anything else. For whereas the ending can be studied as and mastered by themselves, the middle game and the opening must be studied in relation to the endgame. Rook ending appear much more often than any other type of an endgame. For this video, I have prepared the first part of the Rook endgame essential. The video contains Philidor and Lucena position, as well as several examples of the long side, short side principle. In the first position here, Philidor position draw. How to defend as black player. Here, black play Rook b6. This is the so-called Philidor position. The famous French chess player was the first to demonstrate as early as the 18th century the correct method of defense. Rook b6 preventing penetration of the white king to the 6th ranks. Here, white cannot move. And if white play e6 here, how to defend this? Yep, Rook b1 here. If the pawn stood at the e5, the white king, if the pawn stood at the e5, the white king would have had a refuge from vertical check. But as soon as the pawn has stepped forward, the refuge does not exist anymore. So, black, if the pawn is still on e5, if black give check here, white king can refuge here. So if white pawn step forward here, Rook b1, so black can give check. If white play king e5, Rook h1, Rook a1 check, and then king d6, Rook d1 check, back again check. So it will be check, forever check, until the king goes too far from pawn. So white cannot something progress. Here, back to first position. If white play Rook g7, and then black can play Rook a6, still defend 6th rank. And then if black and then if white play Rook to h7 or Rook g6, and then take, and then king e7, king a5, and then king f7, e6, king e7, king e5, king e8, king f6, king fx, 7, king ax, and then draw, king a6. If here white play e6, so black must be play Rook b1, vertical check, king f6, check, check, check. So here first position, and then for second position, here failing to get the Philidor position. If white is to move the initial position, then as Philidor talk, king f6 wins. If black Rook a1, later on the second defensive method in the Philidor position was discovered, an attack from the rear that helped black to hold as well. If the rook fails to occupy the 6th rank, a la Philidor here, if black here, it must be placed the rear of the white pawn. So if white play king f6 and then rook a1, if white play king a6, try to give black checkmate here, and then king f8. The move king f8 is undoubtedly correct. The king goes to the short side, leaving the long side for the rook. But how if black play king d8? White play rook a8 check, king c7 does not lose either. If white play rook a8 and then rook h1. If here white play not play rook a8 and then play king f6, black play rook d7. But how if white here after rook a8, black play rook e2? White play king f7, rook h2, rook h8, rook a7, check, rook g7, rook h8, king e7, king c6, e6, king 7, rook g1 here. So can give check on c1. White win. Back to if white play rook g8 here, black play rook a1, rook g2, king d8. So back to if black play king f8 and then white give check, and then king g7. If we try king d6 white, and then black can defend with king f7. If check, king a8, king e6, king f8. Draw again. If here white play rook h8 and then black must be play rook a1. So if we did check, next to next diagram position here, Lucena position. In this case, the king of the weaker side is spared from the pawn by one or more file. As early in 1497, the Spaniard Lucena demonstrated the method to win. The first, if black play rook h3 here, has no useful move and has to wait here, tempo. White play rook f4. Rook a1 also possible if black play king d7 and then white rook e4 here. So if white play rook f4 and then black rook h1 and then check. With rook f4, white construct the bridge, coordinating method between the rook and the ready to emerge king. But in order for the bridge to be ready to effective, the opponent king must be thrown back one more file. So after white give check on rook a4, rook e4, and then king d7, and then white play king f7 and then check. If king g6, check, king f6 and then check, and then king g5 and then check, rook g4 here. And how if black just play rook g2 and then white idea is rook e5 and then close and then promote pawn. So here for the Lucena position. And then next position, long side, short side principle and draw. Now we come to the position with the king cut off from the enemy pawn. When on move, white win. If this position white move, white win. The simple ways begin with a check from g1 here, and then king e8. also possible. We come to the position with the pawn on the 7 rank and the rook on the d file, delivering protection from the side check. From example, if here white play king h8 and then king f6, here if white play king h8 and then black king f6 and then e7 and then check and then rook d8 and then rook h7 and then rook d6 check and then king g7 and now rook e6 or just rook d1, just win. So here in this position, if white play, white wins, but in this position if black play, can make draw. Rook a7 check and then rook d7, rook a8. The simple defensive methods. Black prevent the position with the pawn on the 7 rank. If white play rook d8 and then rook a7 check again, king d6 check, king a5 check, rook d5, rook e8, draw. King d7. So back to position. If black give check on e7 and then white play king e8 and then king f6, rook e1 check on e7 and then take pawn, draw. And then if white play king d6 and then king f6 and then give check, next move. And then if when rook a7 and then rook d7 and then black play rook a1, king a8. However, any other rook retreat along with the a file. For the example here, rook a1, king a8, king f6, e7, king e6, here king f8, rook f1, king e6, back to a1. Here he managed to hold only due to the fact that the white rook is misplaced at this d7. So how if black play rook a6? Would have been a grave error in the view. After check king a8, king f6, e7, and if black play king e6 and then king f8, promote. King d8. If here after black play rook a8 and then white play king d6, it's useless because king f6 check, just king d6, wedding pen. If white play rook b7 and then king g6, not to play king g8 because king f6, rook f8 and then rook f7. Or here back to a1, king d7, king a8, a7, king f6, king f7 and then king d6, king f6. In case if white play rook d6, here the only correct replay is king g6. Why not play rook a1 is bad because after king e8, king f6, e7, the pawn step ahead with a check. And then if check maybe. Oh, if check. And then if here black play rook b8, loses to rook d8, rook b7, king d6, king b6, king d7. So the best play is after rook d8 is rook e7, check, king d6, check, 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 then king g6. The reason for the draw final was the position of the black rook. It was placed on the long side. Let us shift all the pieces except for the black rook one file to the left. Now when the rook is on the short side, black as one can see easily is lost. So after king up, if black play king f8 and then king f6, because passive defense does not help against a central pawn. So the correct is king g6 here. 37, king f7. Then next position here, same here. After king f6, after king f6 and then black check rook f1 also lead to draw. Why not check on e6? Because the pawn step ahead and then check. If black play here, then rook e7 and then check. White win. So rook f1 check or rook e1. The P-leader method second. And then if king a6 and then king f8, moving the short side. Check, king g7, king e7, rook a1, keeping the rook long. Rook d8, rook a7, rook d7, rook e8, e6, king g6. Draw. Next position, still long side, short side, principal draw. Here position, king g8, king c8. Here, king c8. White try to give checkmate on g8, and then black must be play king c8. It's a good move. Defensive method, king on the short side, rook on the long side. Rook g8 check, king b7, king d7, rook a1, rook e8, rook a7, rook e7, rook e8, d6, king b6. Here, draw. Then the position, too short rook, loss. For a win, white should the move to his opponent. As a matter of fact, one rook c8 loses. In this case, rook a1, rook c8. If black rook c8 loses to rook a1, in the case of rook b1, the white rook occupies the important square e8. If black king g8, king f6, and then rook f8, rook f7 also bad. And here, king d6. And then king f6, king d7, king g7, king e7, king g6, rook a1, king b7, rook d8, rook b8. Just check. Next position. This position is lost for black. White rook hold on the h file, thus preventing black from keeping its own rook long. Here, king c8, check, king b7, king d7, rook g1, d6, rook g7, king e6, rook g6, check, king e7, rook g7, check, king f6, g1, d7. The black rook is too short. So what the difference between this position? Oh, because the rook is on long side. Here. The difference between the rook is too short here. Rook 7, rook g1, d6, rook g7, king e6. Yeah, because the rook on h file. I know. So here for the first video of the rook essential endgame. If you like this position, if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And wait for the part 2 of rook endgame essential. Thank you everyone. Enjoy it.